sisterhood. We just did what she said, but we thought that was better.
Right. Oh,
Gets emailed to them, so you don't have to hang around waiting and hoping something doesn't go on the computer in the meantime.
No.
so hi everybody, thank you for coming to today's lunch and learn session. The aim of the session is to begin to consider how to improve the induction programme so it meets the needs of the new trainees. Thank you so much for going through your pre-course material if you've had time to do that. Looking at the survey results, I know that you all contributed to that, so thank you very much. We had some mixed results in terms of understanding accessibility and inclusion, so we'll quickly go through that. If you want to go through hopes and fears for the session though today, that would be great. So Amy, have you got any hopes and fears for today?
Yeah, I was just hoping that I'd get a better understanding of how we translate the different accessibility needs into like better inclusion at SUMA. So just hopes.
Hopes and fears.
Fears is probably that I talk too much and make a right mess of the session, so everyone shut me up if I go on too much.
We can keep talking, we've got limited time, but it's fine for everybody to contribute and all ideas are valid, so that's great. Scott, any hopes and fears for today?
I'm hoping to get a better view of what this course is about. Fears is that fear whether or not I've got time to complete it.
Okay, it's only 15 minutes, so if you need to go or you need to recap or you need to come back to it later, that's absolutely fine. Bill?
More or less along the lines of what Scott just said, yeah, hoping to learn a bit more about content and fear. I feel nothing.
So here's what we're looking to do. We're wanting to look at what's meant by accessibility and inclusion, and we're looking at ways to make our induction programme more accessible, more inclusive. So any ideas straight off, what does accessibility mean?
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't think so.
Just from my perspective, I think it's about making sure that the different types of people, different types of human being have got access to different routes to engage with a certain topic or certain information. For example, some people are more sort of audio visual, like to see and read the thing, whereas some people are more doers, would like to practically go through the steps. Some people might have like accessibility requirements such as being deaf, so listening to an audio presentation isn't going to work and you need something different in that scenario.
Great, okay, we've got some different ideas there. Scott?
I think Amy covered everything there is to cover there, but yeah, that makes total sense that not everybody learns in a different way, not everybody communicates in the same way, so being able to get the same information in lots of different ways and have the same outcome is, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so again, addressing different needs, I guess, and if put a finger on a salient point now, it's not always about more obvious needs as well. So, something like learning styles is a really, really important thing to take into account, and that could be the difference between having an understanding of the material or not for everybody.
Yeah, so we've thought about learning styles, we've thought about needs if somebody's hard of hearing. There might be other needs that people have, other reasonable adjustments people might need to have put in place as well. Some of the needs people might have might not just be limited to learning, it might be the environment, the room, the break times, that kind of thing.
Probably have to take into account the fact as well that not everybody is going to be aware of the needs. They haven't had exposure to understanding that. So you kind of got to fill gaps that people might not even understand are gaps. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. So actually, sometimes it's come up before, do we want to ask people what they need? But that can be, you might be sort of singling people out and they might not want to say, but also some people don't know, some people don't have that thorough understanding of themselves as to the ways in which to learn best and the needs that they have. So I think sometimes good practice is good practice. So sharing things in an accessible way, making sure different learning needs, learning styles are catered for, and looking at different ways to engage with people is probably key. I've got here, so accessibility is about breaking down barriers to learning activities and environments to ensure everybody can participate. I've got a quote here, looking at the dictionary definition. It's about reaching things easily or retaining things easily. And of course, sometimes we know learning, the longer it takes to learn something, actually, the more cemented and concrete things are. So in terms of learning and things being accessible, don't necessarily want the information to be easily got, but we do need people to be able to actually acquire the knowledge and understand the conversation to participate in whatever way they feel comfortable. So we've looked a little bit about accessibility. What do we think inclusion is then?
So just going off what we've said about accessibility, so maybe inclusion is about making sure all the different accessibility requirements are being catered for when we're bringing people together, so that everybody is included.
Yeah.
Everybody gets an equal chance to learn what there is being taught. You know, whether that's the style that they learn, or even something as simple as disabled access, because obviously, you know, accessibility includes so many different things, you know, learning styles and physical attributes as well.
Okay. So got here, you might not agree with all these things, but inclusion is about a feeling of belonging, and how we promote that. That's up to the conversation. Being valued and showing people of all backgrounds and learning side by side. And when we look at accessibility, we're thinking about and inclusion, we're thinking about the 9 protected characteristics being catered for. Obviously, we've all done lots of training on what those are, but we can read up on it again. We're thinking about disability, we're thinking about marriage, we're thinking about all the different ways in which people might feel discriminated against. I'd like if we could just to have a bit of a conversation about ways in which we could make our induction programme feel more accessible and more inclusive for the people that will be coming on board in July.
I think we have to think about the physicality for start. An induction process involves being in a space, it involves moving between spaces. We have to make sure that physically we're able to allow everybody that physical material access to those places.
I think maybe time and space is a good one as well, isn't it? So that's the physical logistics of the thing, but then not everyone takes information on in the same sort of time and by the same method. So we've got like visual aids as well as written stuff. Then have we allowed the people who need extra time to take that on board? Have they got that? Yeah, just trying to think about the different sort of different needs of the different people who will be at that thing, advocate for all of them. And how do we know that we have, you know, we're checking to make sure that we've covered all the avenues there. I don't know if someone feels like they belong and that they're included in the session. Just because they've turned up doesn't mean they feel like they belong. So
do you think that's about what we do afterwards or about what we do before the session, so people feel like they understand what it's about? Like what steps can we put in before and after, do you think?
it's probably both of them. Probably definitely set up better preparation to make sure that we are covering all of those avenues, and then checking afterwards to make sure that we did a good job of that.
Keep your eye on the size of groups involved as well, because you don't want people feeling overwhelmed. Not everybody works well in a huge group. You know, so if you've got a lot of people that need induction, then break it down into smaller groups, several inductions.
I think Amy put she mentioned just briefly as well, time. I think you have to be very flexible with when you're offering these induction periods. We're looking at, you know, talking about protected characteristics such as pregnancy, maternity, belief. Then we're going to have to be sensitive to that as well. The time people can do that induction.
We've talked about the physical space. We've talked about the timings. We've talked about, but we've not really covered the length of time that the induction period should go on for. We maybe need to think about what we're going to prioritise for the first couple of weeks, and then sort of taking into consideration that some people learn at different rates. Some people might want a repeat of the information. Some people might want time to reflect on that information. Also, I think we can consider what we send out before, so how we prepare people for it, what they're expecting to cover on that session. If the sessions are objective led, if they're outcome led, what people are hoping to achieve, and how will we know if they've met that? Do we send out feedback? Are we going to send out a survey? Are we going to ask them, like, what do you think is the best way to
Maybe
do
an
that?
ongoing sort of, like ongoing feedback. If an induction is broken down into smaller modules, make sure people have got understanding of the first sort of basic module.
Yeah.
And maybe mix that with, if it's relevant, practical. Because not everybody learns. I mean,
Yeah,
if you use an example of driving a car, you can spend months in a classroom learning how to drive a car, but put that person in the car at the end of it, and they're not going to be able to do it because you need that practical thing as well.
Yeah.
So maybe a good mixture of practical and classroom based.
totally agree. And also it can be, an induction period can be really overwhelming anyway. People have left the job, they're going to a new job, or they're starting a job and not having been in a job for a long time, or a period, or in training, or whatever. And it can be overwhelming, and I think it's fairly well established that the things you learn in your first couple of weeks in a job, they've got no connection in the real world at that point. They're just words on a page. They're just words spoken in white space. They've got nothing to link it to. So it's good to set that kind of down early, so there is some kind of benchmark. Move into the period of doing whatever you're doing, and then revisit. And it's almost like a refresher. I would probably say like a couple of weeks, a month later, just to revisit those materials again when they'll make more sense. You couldn't go into that period without having that induction period at the beginning, because there are basics that people are going to need to know straight away. But people will choose. I mean, that's just how you work cognitively. When you've got a lot of information thrown at you, they'll just pick out the bits that seem the most important at the time. And you need to have those other bits kind of, reasserted at that point there.
I'd be interested to know which aspects you think are the basic things people need to cover right at the start versus which things are part of that onboarding process. So we've sort of said like that there's a basic knowledge people need to have, but then we also have 16 tours, as we call them now, induction events, which we're not going to fit that into a 2-week time frame. So
I think if anything, your basics is just you're almost centered around accessibility for Suma in a way. It's about how do you find out the information you need, who to contact if something's wrong, things that don't actually pertain to the day job. It's rather about your employment, they're the basics, and then things that are about operations, you get into the detail of that as you go through the induction and start to do the tours. So anything that's not operational.
Yeah. It's about their existence on that side, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think I've put together some information on learning styles, and you will see at the end of the PowerPoint some further information for reading, should you want to consider that within your when you're planning your specific induction events. I know that a lot of the more simplistic information about learning styles is being given, and we now look at learning styles as a whole and a collaborative way of looking at things. But we've sort of considered timings, we've talked about activities that might be done, or we've considered the length of time, we've considered the room, we might like to consider the activities, how we structure things so that they meet the needs of the people that are training, and that could be flexible. What I want to do now is just reflect on what we were looking to do. So we wanted to understand what's meant by accessibility and inclusion. We wanted to think about ways to make our induction programs more accessible and more inclusive. And I'm just wondering if you could just reflect on what you'll take away from the session. And if you can't think of that right now, because I know it's been quite a whistle-stop tour and we've done it quite quickly, if you want to email that through or meet later as a group, that'd be great. So any takeaways from today?
I'll definitely follow up with the email, because I know there's quite a lot to think about there, but just off the top of my head, just to nutshell sort of what we've covered today, I definitely think that we need to do well to perhaps create some framework, almost like a tick list, for when we're going to set some to communicate something new, so whether that be induction or what it is at SEMA, and to make sure that we've actually considered every sort of preference in terms of accessibility, and we've catered for everyone there. Because we might do it, but it might sort of, it feels like we do at the moment, it's done by accident.
Yeah.
There isn't like a playbook that says these are the things you need to make sure you check off before we do it. So I think that'd be real helpful soon.
Anything else?
Oh, did you say, yeah, I think you said, I think the key word that I took away there at the end, in your summary, was the word collaborative, and I think that's an important approach to take, take away from this, a collaborative approach, isn't even when it's, yeah, it's a good point about learning styles considered quite simplistic now, and I didn't know that, but I'm kind of glad that that is the case, because I do find it that it's simplistic anyway. So that having that collaborative approach is a good approach to take.
And there's lots of different learning styles as well, which you don't always realise, because you think this is how I learn, but Amy learns different to how I learn, which is different to how you learn, which is different to how Lauren learns.
Yeah.
But you know, there's lots more as well.
Yeah.
So there's more to it than you think. Yeah. Trying to get them all into one session, give you something to think about. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
My pleasure.